Yeah, it's time. I'm officially done with Teflon pans. In fact, I think most people should be. This is Minute Food. Okay, so you've probably heard something, probably lots of somethings, about the problems with PFAS. I spent a long time letting all those somethings slide right off me, like, well, Teflon. But I finally got to the point where I felt like I had to figure out what the actual deal is with PFAS, and whether it's safe to use pans made with it. There's going to be some serious alphabet soup in this episode, but don't worry, we'll break it all down. PFAS stands for per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. I'm gonna let our sister channel Minute Earth take over here for a sec, because their latest video did a great job explaining the weird chemistry of PFAS.
Their long bodies are packed with carbon-fluorine bonds, one of the strongest chemical bonds out there. These bonds act like a straitjacket, binding the molecules so tightly together that its atoms basically can't react with anything else. Not food, not dirt, not water. The carrier proteins in our blood that normally grab onto and distribute fatty acids often grab onto and distribute their PFAS doppelgangers instead. And those doppelgangers don't do the critical jobs that fatty acids do.
If you want to dig into the nitty-gritty of how and why these molecules are so problematic, bookmark that awesome video to watch later. But if you want to know what all this means for your kitchen, stay right here. Because you probably have a nonstick pan, maybe several in your stash. Nonstick pans account for something like 70% of the pans sold in the US. And most of these pans get their non-stickiness from PFAS coatings, most often one named PTFE, but commonly called Teflon. Teflon used to be manufactured using a second PFAS called PFOA. I know, I warned you about the abbreviations. Anyway, back in the 2000s, evidence started accumulating that PFOA could cause certain types of cancer. As a result, many countries banned it, and companies started using other PFASs to manufacture nonstick coatings for pans. Phew, disaster averted. Except, here's the thing. Because of their weird chemistry, all PFASs are potentially problematic, albeit to different degrees. The only reason we banned PFOA specifically is that it was so commonly used that we had pretty good evidence that it was dangerous. Now that we're turning to other PFASs, evidence is accumulating that they're problematic too. But at least in the US, each of these chemicals needs to be assessed and regulated individually. And that takes a long time. It's like the slowest game of whack-a-mole ever. So let's get to the meat of the issue. Does all this mean that your Teflon pan is dangerous? There are a few different potential routes of exposure here. First, you could ingest pieces of the pan's nonstick coating. No matter how well you take care of your pan, that nonstick layer will eventually fail. So little PFAS shreds are inevitable. But the scientific consensus seems to be that the PFAS in these shreds is bound so tightly together that they'll pass right through you. No harm done. Then there's inhalation. When you heat PFAS past a certain point, it starts to break down and release toxins. That's why you'll see warnings about how and how hot to heat your nonstick pan. But studies have found that these pans can reach these toxic temperatures with some pretty normal use, like preheating it for just a few minutes. People have gotten sick after overheating pans, but cases of so-called polymer fume fever are rare, and they tend to resolve quickly, unless you're a bird. Birds have some physiological quirks that make them super susceptible to these fumes. In the vicinity of a too hot Teflon pan, a bird can drop dead in minutes. This is actually pretty common. Our friends lost their pet birds this way. So avian aficionados, you have been warned. But for everyone else, PFAS inhalation is probably a relatively small risk. Okay, so assuming you're not a bird, none of this sounds all that bad. But there is a big issue, and it's the PFAS that's out there in the environment. Like what's been discharged during and after manufacturing, and what's been dumped in landfills, again, mostly by manufacturers. All this PFAS has made its way into our drinking water and our food, and from there, into us. More than 97% of Americans have measurable levels of PFAS in their blood, and studies suggest that the vast majority of it gets there via what we eat and drink. But if PFAS out there is the problem, why am I getting rid of my pans? Well, the only way we're going to stop accumulating PFAS in our environment and our bodies is by drastically decreasing the amount of PFAS produced, either by regulation or by reducing the demand. And while I'm not in the position to regulate toxic substances, I am in a position to help reduce the demand, both as a consumer and as someone who interacts with a lot of people who really like cooking. Plus, I don't actually think that kicking our Teflon habit is actually that big a deal. I mean, nothing out there is quite as nonstick as a PFAS pan. Teflon is the slipperiest substance we know of. But there are other kinds of pans that can get really close. in my opinion, close enough that they make PFAS pans unnecessary in most kitchens. First, there are non-stick pans that aren't made with PFAS, most notably what you'll hear called ceramic. These pans aren't actually ceramic, they're metal pans with a ceramic-like coating. I've been trying out a ceramic pan for this video, and I think it performs pretty similarly to Teflon, although some people do have complaints about sticking. But for me, there are a few other problems. First, like Teflon, these pans' nonstick coatings will eventually fail, making them useless. And second, while the scientists I spoke to all considered this kind of ceramic coating safe, I couldn't find good, rigorous research on its safety. So make of that what you will. For me, the best Teflon substitutes are cast iron and carbon steel pans. Sure, they require a bit more work and they do have a learning curve, but when seasoned and used properly, these pans can get very close to the non-stickiness of actual non-stick pans. If the seasoning layer fails, you can just re-season it rather than throwing it away. And there's nothing in these babies that poses any legitimate health or environmental threat. So what's my takeaway when it comes to Teflon? The science suggests that with careful use, a Teflon pan is a pretty low risk, health-wise. But the science is also very clear that PFAS is a serious, large-scale problem. One expert I talked to said that PFAS is going to be the largest contamination problem the US has ever faced. And I really don't want to be a part of that. And sure, PFAS is in so many things, and right now there's basically no way to know if products I'm using contain it. But one thing we know does, and that I think is pretty easy to ditch, is non-stick pans. So ta-ta, Teflon. But tossing your Teflon may not feel like you're doing enough about this really big problem. So go check out Defend Our Health, an organization that chipped in to help us make this video, and one that's been working for the past decade to keep toxic chemicals like PFAS out of our food, water, and products. In the last few years, they spearheaded legislation that banned products containing PFAS in the state of Maine. They helped set the strictest standards for PFAS in our drinking water. And they supported farmers whose land has been contaminated with PFAS. Defend Our Health is an organization that I am personally familiar with. I know they're doing really great work in a really challenging space. To learn more and to help support a cleaner future, click the link on screen and in the description. And definitely go watch that Minute Earth video. It is such a good look into why PFAS is so weird and why it's such a big problem. Then go watch all Minute Earth's other videos, which will teach you basically everything you always wondered about the world, from why rivers curve to why weather forecasts are so bad.